In our gospel reading, we're getting pretty deep into the story of Jesus' life, and we're starting to see two sides of Jesus emerge. There's the side of him that's always preaching about loving your neighbor and treating your neighbor as you would treat yourself, talking about kindness, talking about mercy. And then there's a side of him that's always arguing with these guys called the Pharisees. You may have started to wonder, why did Jesus have to argue so much with the Pharisees? So we're going to look at one example of this today from Matthew 15. In Matthew 15, Jesus has another one of his famous arguments with the Pharisees. So the Pharisees come to them and they say, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat." And he answered them, "And why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? For God commanded, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if anyone tells his father or his mother, 'What you would have gained from me is given to God,' he need not honor his father. So for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of God. You hypocrites! Well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men.'" So this quote here from Isaiah really gets to the heart of why Jesus has such problems with the Pharisees. The Pharisees, in short, they have a couple of traditions. One is they want everyone to wash their hands before they eat anything. They're giving Jesus and his disciples a hard time because they just sat down to eat and they didn't wash. The other tradition is, instead of taking care of their parents with money that they have this tradition where they can say, "Well, I gave my money to the temple, so I don't have to give it to you." And Jesus is saying, you guys are getting out of something that God commanded you to do, honoring your mother and father, through this tradition that you've made up for yourself. So as Isaiah said, they teach as doctrines the commandments of men. So he's accusing the Pharisees of putting their own traditions higher than God's laws. Then he goes on to say something else. So after they say, your guys, they don't wash their hands before they eat. And Jesus says to them, "Hear and understand, it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth that defiles a person." In verse 17, he has to explain this because Peter says, what do you mean by that? So in verse 17, he says, "Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is expelled? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person." We're talking about the heart again. Up here, this quote from Isaiah, it says, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." This is why Jesus argues with the Pharisees. And then he goes on to list things that come out of your mouth, that proceed from the heart and come out of your mouth. Evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These come out of your heart. They come out of your mouth. So the issue here is that the Pharisees, they have these strict religious traditions, but their heart is not close to God. They don't worship God with their hearts. You're going to see this a lot as we're reading through the Gospels. Whenever Jesus gets into one of his fights with the Pharisees, it's because they don't worship God with their hearts. They appear to worship God by wearing their robes, by practicing their traditions, but they don't really worship God with their hearts. And this is what Jesus wants from us. He wants our hearts. He wants our hearts to be near to him. Now, does that mean that we just live however we want and then say, "Oh, my heart belongs to God"? No. You're going to see as we continue reading, Jesus does want us. He wants us to live a certain way. He wants us to live a life that's worthy of his calling. But he wants our hearts first. He wants our hearts to belong to him. So now you may be thinking, well, I think I like Jesus. I think my heart belongs to Jesus. Or maybe you're thinking, I'm really not sure. I mean, I know about Jesus. I go to church. I'm not sure. Does my heart really belong to Jesus? Well, here's the way to become sure about that. Spend time in prayer, right? You've got to spend time in prayer. You need to talk to Jesus. If you love someone, you talk to them, you communicate with them. If you have concerns, if you have problems, if you have doubts, if you have fears, talk to Jesus about that. He wants you to come to him with those things. And the other thing is exactly what we're doing with this gospel reading. If you want to know Jesus, you need to know his word. You need to know the gospel. And we're reading it 4 times. There's 4 different versions of it: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all tell the same story, just in slightly different styles. And so we're going to be reading the gospel 4 times by 4 different authors so that we can know Jesus better. Jesus doesn't just want you to behave like a Christian. He doesn't just want people around you to think you're a Christian. He wants your heart. He doesn't just want you to be at church on time. He wants your heart. He wants you to desire to worship him.